The rebuild of the head on our 1977 Albin Ballad is gaining steam. Having removed the old deck pump-out fitting and epoxied over the old hole, I cut a new hole under the waterline for the new wash basin. Then I start removing all of the original through holes, which after 44 years are in dire need of replacing. Next, I need to move the battery chargers, and while that sounds easy enough, it comes with its own set of problems. My name is Andy, and this is the story of one small ship. It's the 22nd of April 2021. It's a windy old day, and the warm weather has taken a sudden leave of absence, it seems. Yesterday I filled in the screw holes by the old cooling water intake, and I sanded away all of the anti-fouling around where the strainer and fitting are going to go. So all I need to do now is cut out the new hole for the sink drain in the galley and sand away all the epoxy on the outside, and then I'm ready to mount the new fittings. I'll be using Sikaflex 591 for that. In the past I would have used 291, but Sika have recently updated their product range with a new formula that is supposedly less toxic, better for the environment, and more resilient against UV. So of course I'm going to be using that. I will say that Sika could definitely do with some help in their marketing, because I've been met with so much confusion and as many answers as people when I've asked what the difference is between the products. I couldn't even get a clear answer from Sika's product pages and had to dive pretty deep into the documentation to find out what the difference actually is. Anyway, the application and function should be the same for both products, so it's not really a big deal. Once I'm done installing the new fittings, I can start moving things around in the forepeak. I need to move the battery charger, I need to make room for the seawater pump, and yeah, it just might be time to clean the cockpit. I'm sanding down all of the repairs and fills I've done around the hull. The original through holes were all recessed into the hull, so I've filled and drilled out all of the holes in order to create a flush surface for the new fittings to sit snug against. With the exception of the galley seawater intake, sanding out bevels and layering up fiberglass patches really isn't necessary for this. I'm going to get back to that seawater intake later. I dry fitted the new through hole and ball valve in the galley. Eventually this is going to connect to the new sink, which is going to drain in the back of this compartment over there. The current sink drains in the middle, and when we put the hose in, it kind of takes up all the space in here, so I want to get a sink that drains in the far back there. Under the V-berth, the new fitting for the seawater intake is mounted. I still need to sand this down and prepare this area for sealant. I gave the bilge a good scrubbing and mounted the new through hole in there. Obviously it needs to be shortened, but I think it's going to be perfect. Well, all the fittings are cut to size. I've sanded everything, so now I just need to clean everything off one last time with acetone, and then we can break out the Sikaflex. Ah, the joys of applying marine sealant. I really am not a pro at this, rather the opposite, and I always find it impossibly messy and hard to get right. My usual tactic is to just get as much as possible in there and ignore the mess until after I'm satisfied the seal is good. Then I wipe away the excess. I'm sure there's a technique to this, but it's not something I ever picked up on, and since I hopefully won't have to do it again for a few decades, I don't really mind. Before I went home yesterday, I permanently installed all of the new through hulls in their final positions. I made sure that all of the valves open and close in the same direction, so you push up to open and pull down to close. It makes sense in a location like here in the head, where one valve is 90 degrees offset from the other one. In the bilge, the new valve takes up a whole lot more space than the old one, but we're just going to have to live with that. I had to mount the valve in the galley at an angle to accommodate this shelf, but it should be fine. I don't know if there will be a shelf there once I start remaking this area, but for now, I mean, we can always move it later, it's fine. So having those through hulls finally mounted means that I only have to lock the valves in place with Loctite, and then Marella is watertight and ready to get splashed. Of course, I still need anti-fouling and polishing the hull, but it's a minor job, it takes a weekend. And so tonight I'm going to go online and I'm going to book a time for splashing, and it'll be in 1 or 2 weeks, and then she'll be back in the water and it'll be fantastic. I mean, none of the projects that I'm working on right now really require the boat to be on the hard. There is one thing that I would have loved to do this year before splashing the boat, and that is replace the log. Last year I tried to 3D print a new paddle wheel for the existing Navman log that we have, and it didn't work out so well. So I'd looked up a log that I planned to install this year. It's NASA Marine's electromagnetic version with a combined depth sounder, and unfortunately it's just not in the budget for this year. So I'm going to have a new paddle wheel printed, and this time I'll try to be a little bit more careful in the finish work, and I'll look into maybe getting bigger magnets or more powerful magnets. But the new log will have to wait until next year, and for now we have the GPS, which gives us speed over ground, which is quite all right. We will do fine with that. So next up on my list is to move the battery chargers from this side of the V-berth to that side, but in order to do that, I first need to do some tidying. Well, I think squeaky clean is a bit of an overstatement, but it's certainly better than before. Now I just need to get rid of this bunk top and we can get going. Well, I cleaned up most of the crud. It's still pretty nasty, but we'll take one step at a time. So electrics. Ever since I set foot on Marella for the first time, I wanted to do something about all these cables strewn about all over the place. Back in 2017, when I redid most of the electrics, I did the best job I could with the limited time that I had, and there are still cables hanging down inside the carpentry and behind the shelves and stuff, and it's not very pretty, so I really want to take care of that. So while I'm at it moving the battery chargers anyway, I'm going to take care of the cable runs and make sure that everything is neat and hidden. There we go. We just need to hook everything up again. As so often happens in these cases, this area started out pretty neat, and then over time, as I've added things, it's gotten more and more chaotic, and now it's definitely past due that I sort this out. So I feel like this is a good opportunity to redo all of this. Actually, there is a silver lining to moving the chargers over to this side, because all of the cables going to and from the breaker panel and the alternator and engine can now go straight to the chargers and then on to the batteries. Previously, some of them had to go this way, all the way over here to the chargers and then back to the battery bank. So this will be much neater, actually. This area over here is where I'm going to put the fuses, and so I'm going to move the main fuse from the consumer bank from here to here, and it's been really hard to access that, so I'm looking forward to doing that. That's going to be much better. All of the fuses will be in the same position. I'm also going to get a few more bus bars, because there are many more things connected to the batteries over here now than there used to be, and I obviously don't want to use one spot on the bus bar for more than one thing. So yeah, this is going to clean up nicely. Well, that's all of the cable out from underneath the settees. Now I just need to unhook them from the engine and wrap them on the other side and do it right. Welcome to the engine room. Yeah, the Ballad is kind of infamous for having bad access to the engine compartment, and as you can see, some previous owner removed this entire wall, including the wall separating the engine from the starboard locker back there. I think that was done when the engine was replaced, which was back in 2012. The new engine is a 16 horsepower Vetus. It's worked quite well. It's got something like 450 running hours now. Had slightly below 300 when we bought the boat, and yeah, it's never given me any trouble, but as you can see, it does need some love. So this spring I'm going to take off the alternator and clean it and service that, and also take off and service the heat exchanger and replace the coolant. Ooh. Sometimes it pays to have the right tools for the right job. There we go. Nope. That was a pain to get out. Well, the cables are out. The next step is to route them on the port side of the boat, and in order to do that I need to tidy up the settee, remove the cover, and so that I can access the side of the hull. I also need to figure out how many cables to run there and their diameter, and so I'm going to spend some time thinking about that. I have a bunch of cables routed on this side already just under the deck here, but those are mainly consumers, and I don't want to mix those with these thick cables that carry heavy currents from the alternator over to the charger. It'll feel much better and safer to think of the two as two separate parts of one system, where the ones up here mainly carry small currents to consumers around the boat, and the ones down here carry larger currents into the system, like from the alternator, from the solar panels, etc. The two cables that come from the engine, the negative from the engine block and the positive from the alternator, are going to get routed underneath the settee here and into the V-berth where they'll connect to the charger and batteries. I made a few of these little standoffs out of plywood and I just tacked them in place temporarily with gaffer's tape. I have 3 here now, but I will probably end up having about 6 or 7 of them. So there will be 4 cables routed this way in total. The 4th one is going to be the cable from the solar panels. And then the other side of the boat can be dedicated to plumbing, so I can run hot and cold water over there. I ran out of cable clamps, so this is the best I can do today, but I can open up here so we can get the cables through into the wardrobe, and then the same thing on the other side into the V-berth. Well, it took half an afternoon and I had to rip apart what feels like half the boat to get it done, but finally routed all the cables from the chargers to the chart table in the back of the boat. And so now I just have to get them from the chart table to the engine, which is going to be another fun exercise. Sadly, that's all I'm going to have time for today. I had hoped to be able to hook up the chargers again and let the solar panel maintain the batteries. I don't like keeping them disconnected for too long, but it can wait another day or 2. It's not a big deal. Well, let's pack up and go home. Well, it's a beautiful day at the boatyard, but here inside Marella, the situation is somewhat more chaotic. The first thing I need to do today is route these cables all the way back to the engine and also route the solar cable back so that I can get charge back in the batteries. The next thing I need to do is epoxy these plywood spacers in place, and here I'm torn between what I want to do and what I realistically have time to do, because we're weeks out from splashing and I would like to cover these in fiberglass matting and paint it and make it all nice, but there's just not time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly epoxy these in place, so when it comes time to do the major project of tearing out all the old foam-backed vinyl and sanding and painting the inside of the hull, then I can just dig these out with the oscillating multi-tool and do the job properly. So this is where the cables arrive from the battery compartment, and I'm going to cut out a groove just like I did on the other side right here, and I'll have to move this bolt either up or down, probably here, but I'll see how much space I have when I'm done. Right, so that's done. Now that this is opened up, we can route the cables all the way from here over to the engine breaker, which is hidden under the lip of the pilot berth. I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep the engine breaker there, and when I made my new electrical panel, I actually made room for the engine breaker next to the main breaker. But the trouble with that is that if you turn off the engine breaker while the engine is running, then you can seriously damage or even destroy the alternator. So I think it's better to just keep it hidden. But in order to access the area under the chart table on this side, I need to get rid of that shelf. And I did that last year when I installed the heating, and as far as I remember, it was quite a mess. But what the heck, I've already disassembled half the boat, a little more can't hurt. I'm going to have to open up another one of those notches back there, and in order to do that, I need to clear out the pilot berth. Joy! That's basically where I put everything I needed to get rid of in order to tear apart the rest of the boat, so I don't know where to put any of this. But I'm going to figure something out. I'm going to head home, have dinner, come back tomorrow well rested, and tear into this. All right. It really does look worse than it is, I promise. Anyway, moving the electrics over to the port side really has improved things a lot, and with the new through-hull fittings installed, I'm almost ready to get back to the head rebuild. If you like this episode, you can help us out by leaving a like. It really does make a difference. And press subscribe and click the notification bell to follow us on our journey. You can also follow us on social media. Check out the links below for that. And thank you so much for watching. Fair winds.